Wonder Woman 84 busted out on our screen like a Christmas present that we needed to top off 2020 with. But while folks were tearing it apart for performances, acting, or plot, I decided to look at it from a different perspective. What about the design and vehicles? Because, as you all know, I love my jets, I love my tanks, and I wanted to know what happened to this movie and why did it go so wrong. There were two scenes in this film that pulled me completely out of reality, and one was all practical effects by the looks of it, with some CG in it, but the vehicles were practical. The second effect, that's jet sequence, was complete CG, but the design and planning of it made no sense whatsoever. Alright, hammer subscribe and let's jump into the first sequence, and that's flying a jet plane. Well, guess what? To fly a jet plane, you need to push a lot of buttons, have a lot of settings in place, and make sure the jet has fuel. This is just a quick sequence of starting up an F-111. You gotta know all those buttons before you can fly through the fireworks. And as a result, many World War II pilots could never even certify to fly jet planes because they couldn't get used to all the controls and handling. Now, as for a World War I pilot flying a jet plane, I'd say good luck on that after about maybe 20 years of training, perhaps. But I guess it was an easy piece of cake. So let's jump away from that reality and jump into the jet itself. That is a Panavia Tornado. Fantastic plane. 70s vintage, could have been at the Smithsonian. There's just one problem here, and that problem is that somebody went a little crazy with their CG, and here's why. If you pay attention to this plane, variable wing geometry, so it can fold the wings back, it can fly about 1,000 miles. Well, that's not quite the same as flying all the way to Egypt from New York, but there's one other thing that kind of really sticks out here, and that is the layout of the cockpit. If you're paying attention, you're going to see that the Panavia Tornado has a tandem front and back configuration on the pilot and the weapons officer. Now, that's very much like, let's say, Top Gun, where you've got Goose in the back, Maverick in the front. But in the movie itself, that was all changed around. Why was it changed around? Doesn't really make any sense. But I guess you have to put the actors next to each other to make sure that, you can film their reactions and how they interact with one another or how they freak out. Well, that was done. It was done fairly well, I suppose. But why not use the original plane? Because there is a plane that is the F-111 that these actual cockpit seats were from, and part of the cockpit was recreated for this movie. And the F-111 did exist in the 80s. It was an American plane with a greater range of around 4,000 miles, so in theory it could have made its way to Africa from Washington, D.C. if it really tried. But why not use the F-111? This usually happens when you don't have a consultant on the crew and you have an artistic director who goes, I would like to create something. Let's use this plane here. That's sitting right next to a Buccaneer. I believe that was the plane that was sitting on the tarmac right next to the Panavia Tornado at the Smithsonian. Sure, let's use all British planes. Let's for some reason hate on American planes such as the F-111. But what do? We need to have the actors next to each other so they can look at each other and we can get their reactions. We can't have them sitting one behind another. Well, in an airplane that couldn't even make it all the way to Africa, but that's okay. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go into Photoshop and we're gonna make it look real good. Now, okay, admittedly, it was actually a pretty good job that they did. But look at that cockpit and look at this plane. So here's what was done. Okay, I am a 3D modeler and I've got the two airplanes side by side. So I'm gonna use my paintbrush here. I'm gonna cut up the cockpit on the first one, the F-111, drag it over, and then kind of like stretch it and reformat it and make sure it's happening at night so you can't see my piss poor stitching job. And oh, here we go. How does that look? Boom! I've made a brand new plane that could never exist, didn't exist, and let's break some realism of the 80s. Alright, it is a comic book movie, seriously, yes. But you know what? Great success! Wonder Woman, we are good to go. Alright, so there is a reason to actually put them side by side, and of course we know that you have to have their reactions as they're looking at amazing fireworks as the airplane flies above Washington. Now, the actual reason to use a double cockpit is because in the F-111, the way that the cockpit opens up, you can actually have a camera shooting through one side of the canopy that's open, and then this allows you to get the shot through the canopy without having to open the glass. And also, because the cockpit is a whole separate pod that can eject from the airplane, those pods are available in quite a few museums and quite a few air bases still. So you could get your hands on one of those and film entirely in the pod with the canopy open. And of course, you close one side down, open up the other side, and you're filming right through it. And there's your pilot and co-pilot sitting next to each other looking pretty. So realistically, great use of the right cockpit, timeline's good, but why would you stick it onto a Panavia Tornado? It's like sticking an Airbus on a Boeing and then getting a pilot who was, from the Stone Age to fly it. The cringe is strong. For those who noticed it, let me know if you caught any other things in the airplane sequence, but we're going to move along right over to the next cringe, which is just as much fun. So they take off from the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., fly their 3,000 miles, riding off of lightning bolts all the way to Egypt, where we have a highway chase scene. The evil antagonist is riding away, surrounded by a protection of former Soviet Union Russian vehicles. And we love our Russian vehicles because they look pretty badass. Well, most of the time they look badass. In this case, they look pretty crappy. And here's why. Diana is hanging on to a truck that has a bunch of sheet metal hanging off of it. That was made to look like a BRDM.
It's a fake!
Oh yeah, definitely made it look like a BRDM, but nowhere close to a BRDM. I don't know how much of a budget was blown on this, but honestly, this was a waste of money. Again, a consultant should have been brought in to look at what a BRDM is, how it's shaped, or why not just buy a couple? They are a dime a dozen all over Eastern Europe and Africa. If you're filming this in Spain, get a couple of them from, maybe Poland or former Balkan nations that have tons of these BRDMs. Go to Slovakia. Slovakia's got a bunch of these as well. They're a dime a dozen and they cost about $10,000 to $20,000. You might even get one for free if you tell them you're making a Wonder Woman movie, but you're going to get something that is an actual BRDM that can drive at 100 kilometers down a highway, but not something that looks like a F-150, maybe an F-250 with a bunch of sheet metal attached to it. There's actually a guy who is credited with vehicle design. The guy worked on Tenet, and I think that's the only other thing that he worked on. You can look him up on IMDb, but dude, why? Why would you make something look so crappy instead of actually going and buying the right vehicle? Or at least make it look realistic, not a bunch of sheet metal. You can see the welds, you can see the wheel wells. In some shots, you can see underneath the vehicle. This pulled me completely out of the movie, and I gotta tell you, if a movie has these sorts of mistakes that I notice, yes, I am a hardcore fan of vehicles and tanks and all that stuff, fine. But how bad was the movie that I was paying attention to the undersides of a poorly built stunt vehicle instead of actually paying attention to the plot or the film? That should be the lesson of this movie and this fail. I'm going to back away from the rest of this video and let you provide me feedback in the comments and share this video and let me know what else you caught. If I'm completely off my rocker, did I get the planes right? Did I get the vehicles wrong? I'll let you be the judge. Make sure you subscribe, write some comments, do all that fun stuff in this video. Let me know if you like this and I'll probably make more then. All right, happy 2021. Hopefully, they get consultants for those movies and properly treat them instead of using Photoshop to move cockpits around from one plane to another. Because that's just not right in the modern age of CG.